Welcome, everybody. I'm Lis Harris, the chair of the writing program at Columbia, and this is the 15th year, I can hardly believe that, but it is, of Nonfiction Dialogues. And I am delighted that my old friend Amitava Kumar is here this evening, and our wonderful student Eyal Cohen will introduce him.
Hey
Eyal?
everyone, welcome. Um, we will have a Q&A after Liz and Amitava are done speaking. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can just message me privately in the chat and I'll put you all in a list and I'll call on you when the time comes. In the note prefacing his collection of essays titled Lunch with a Bigot, Amitava Kumar labels reading, writing, places, and people as his north, south, east, and west. In the 26 essays that follow, Kumar, as he's done throughout his illustrious career, showcases to his readers the direction from which he came and the one to which he is going. Over a span of 10 multi-genre books, 5 editorial works, documentary scripts, literary criticism, academic writing, and countless articles, Kumar established an acute perceptiveness. As the author, Leah Mirakoff of the LA Review of Books says, Kumar provokes us with his vulnerability, his observations of our shared flaws, and his impassioned interest in a world he hopes to make more livable. He reminds us what the writer as a rioter, can do. And he reminds us that to be alive demands that we search for new forms of intimacy all the time. Each of Kumar's works manifests this observational quality in their own refined manner. In A Foreigner Carrying in the Crook of His Arm a Tiny Bomb, Kumar's perceptiveness invites us to consider, as he remarked in an interview in the New York Times, the voice of the terrorist on the other end, the displaced provincial, the impoverished youth finding himself in the house of wealth. Kumar's ability to expand his I to talk about the we is the making of an exceptional writer. Similarly to the expansion from the understanding of the self to the understanding of the other, Kumar broadens concepts of writing to life itself. In his essay, Paper, Kumar parallels the loss of his grandmother to the loss of his native tongue of Hindi. Having moved to the United States from India several decades ago, Kumar writes, I discover myself as stranded at a distance. I am united with the people I am no longer among only by the dispossession of a common tongue. Kumar opts to let themes of language and writing guide the self-exploration of his identity, and his body of work becomes a bountiful resource for aspiring nonfiction writers. Kumar grew up in the city of Patna in India, and his academic resume includes a bachelor's degree from Hindu College, 2 master's degrees from Delhi University and Syracuse University, and a doctoral degree from University of Minnesota. Today, Kumar is the Helen D. Lockwood Professor of English at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. We'd be here all night if I were to list all the acclaim and awards bestowed upon Kumar's work. So my pick of the bunch are his Guggenheim Fellowship from 2016, the Best Nonfiction Book of the Year award in the Asian American Literary Awards for the aforementioned A Foreigner Carrying in the Crook of His Arm a Tiny Bomb, and his book Immigrant, Montana, a novel, making its way into Barack Obama's favorite books of 2018. The more I engage with Kumar's work, the more I understand how he situates himself between reading, writing, places, and people. It is from that place that he is able to observe, dissect, and write, which at the end of the day is the direction we all want to head in. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all Amitava Kumar and to turn the evening over to Professor Lis Harris, Chair of Columbia's Writing Department.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Because of the nature of Zoom, we never used to have any readings at these conversation evenings, but I decided that it would be a good idea to do that. We did it with Maggie Nelson, and we're going to do it now. And Amitava has graciously agreed to read from his book. From which book is it you're reading from?
I'll read from Lunch with a Bigot, if that's okay. Yeah?
That's great.
Well, first of all, thank you, Liz. You know, Liz was sweet and generous to say I'm her friend, but actually I was her student. What? 20 years ago, I had applied for a fellowship at a writers' festival and was appointed a fellow. And it was my wonderful good luck to be with Liz, and I have carried those lessons with me, and I'll hope to get a chance to discuss those things. Eyal, that was such a wonderful introduction, man. You're so cool, you know. Let's be friends on Facebook or something. All right. So listen, guys, thank you for being here. When I mentioned that I was Lis's student, I should say that Lis would inspire one, certainly inspire me, to be serious and also to be patient. But in this piece that I'm going to read, it is nothing but a display of frivolity of some sort, and I'm slightly embarrassed by it, but I still want to share it with you, partly because I think one of the springs of nonfiction should not just be reportage, but actually we should come up with inventive, almost prompts or occasions, even if they're slightly ridiculous, to investigate the world. And you'll know what I'm saying once I have read. I've been asked to read for 5 minutes. This will take just a little under 5 minutes. It would be performance art, a bit like doing brown face, except not. The idea thrilled him as soon as it was proposed by his editors. He was to go to a few bookstores in New York City and ask, "Where is your white literature section?" He began with McNally Jackson Bookstore on Prince Street. In the display window, he saw some of his friends' books. There was a reading that evening by his pal who had written about an Indian American man who lived out in the desert with his angry wife and autistic son. Inside, there was a cafe. At one table, 2 women were talking in German. He returned to the front desk, but there were several people there and he felt intimidated. Coming back to the cafe section, he asked for a Moroccan mint tea. The windows had been thrown open. It was a lovely spring morning. The girl in the shop opposite had come out onto the street and was photographing her displays, 3 large teddy bears in short dresses. A young man sat down next to him with his cappuccino and a black hardbound copy of Bolaño's Antwerp. The man went back to the front desk. The man went back to the front desk. "Where is your white literature section?" The sales clerk, with his muscular body encased in a bright red t-shirt, could have been just at home behind the counter at a bicycle store. Let's say his name was Josh. Hearing the question, Josh stopped for a second, but without betraying his amiable self, he said reasonably, "That would be the literature of the white countries." Extending one finger of his right hand and then another, he counted England, France, and then said, "Let's walk over there." En route to the shelf, Josh said with a smile, "The majority of literature is white." He was pointing at rows of books in front of them. The first one he picked out was Nicholson Baker's House of Holes. "He's fun," he said. To Baker's right, there was Don DeLillo. He got a mention as well. Josh said half to himself, "Who are the great white authors?" Immediately to his right was the seeming answer, withdrawing a copy of Freedom. Half an inch from its place on the shelf, he gently intoned, "Franzen." Josh mentioned Hemingway and immediately discounted the recommendation by explaining kindly that Hemingway wasn't contemporary. He waved an arm at a line of Cormac McCarthy paperbacks, but proclaimed them too bloody. Walking over to a bank of Philip Roth books, Josh said, "He was born in New Jersey. He is Jewish. His name is Philip Roth. He is amazing." Putting a reverent hand on American Pastoral, he continued, "This is incredible." The grateful customer acknowledged that he had perhaps heard of Roth. He took the book down. He took down the book he had been shown and sat down on a chair to read from its dust jacket. Josh, his sweet-natured guide, looked down at him, still full of amiability, and said as he left, "Enjoy, buddy." The man had actually read Roth's American Pastoral some years ago with great attention. There was a quote from that novel carefully copied down in his writing journal at home. I quote, "The fact remains that getting people right is not what living is all about anyway. It's getting them wrong that is living. Getting them wrong and wrong and wrong And then, on careful reconsideration, getting them wrong again. That's how we know we are alive. We are wrong. Unquote. Some other images from the book had also stayed imprinted in the man's mind. The strength and confusion of Swede Lvov, rich, detailed descriptions of glove making. More disturbing, the Swede's daughter, Mary, who became an arsonist and then a Jan. And now he returned to them in his quiet corner. But only for a minute, because the emotion he experienced more strongly was guilt. He hadn't lied, not exactly, but he had engaged in subterfuge. Why hadn't he practiced straight journalism? Why hadn't he come into the store, produced a business card, taken out a pad, and asked blunt questions like, who decides on these categories? Can you tell me if there is any debate between you guys? He hadn't done that. And now he would never be allowed to appear on This American Life. The man saw his dreams drown in the sea of guilt. Imagining a rescue, or at least an escape, he chose Hemingway's A Movable Feast, and having paid $15.75, quickly left for another bookstore.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. When we first were discussing your work, the subject of academic writing came up, and I had some bitter things to say about it.
Yes.
You have gone forward with that theme in very complicated and interesting ways. You wrote a whole book called Every Day I Write the Book about style, really, in which you say you're trying to help young academics unshackle themselves from the burdens of it. But that's really an impossible task, isn't it? Aren't the requirements of academic writing to be filled with jargon?
You're right. They are, unfortunately. It's a great, it's a pity. But I think, one of the names you just invoked when you were introducing me was that of, in passing, was that of Maggie Nelson.
Right.
And she's a great example of someone who has absorbed what would be called the lessons of theory and yoked them to another form of writing and made each of those parts more evocative and more powerful. So I guess I'm trying to say that it's easy to submit to the unsatisfying rigors of academic writing, but it's also possible in many examples of work done at the edges, particularly by Black writers. I'm thinking of Fred Moten, Saidiya Hartman, Farah Jasmine Griffin, Alondra Nelson with her work on the DNA. There are some folks who are actually working on the intersection, and that's an interesting thing, Liz. I must say, I've stopped going to conferences, and often, recently, a few months ago, someone asked me, one of the journals asked me, could you do a reading of this, blah, blah, blah. And I had to say, I said, even just reading the title of the piece, made much of my hair fall out. I mean, you see, I've grown since the time you knew me. You see what has happened? That's academic writing,
Plenty there. Well, at one point you call yourself a naturalized citizen of the English department, which means that you went through the hoops of all that, right? But
yes.
But you totally managed to free yourself from that. Your work is zero burdened by anything like that. So I know what you mean. I do know what you mean. But I mean, is having very good writers who have, strong voices always done that, really combined all kinds of disciplines and all kinds of information and lyric writing and imaginative writing? I mean, the tradition that I grew up in, even at the New Yorker, people felt that they could go into any world or any field and talk about its complexities as long as they made the prose lucid.
Yeah. that was true of a particular period. But I think around the time I met you and 10 years or 15 years before that, Liz, there was a dominance of what was called theory that produced a discourse. I mean, it was very thoughtful things, you know, questioning of everything and empowering people to question conventions or conventional thinking. But it also meant the straight jacketing into a vocabulary that was so dead. I mean, since we are talking with young people here, I must tell you, you know, my former colleague Billy Joe is here. I had just been hired then at Penn State. And I remembered, and this is just after I met you, Liz, I can't tell you how desperate I was to think of myself as a real writer, you know? And one of the people you introduced me in your course, Liz, was Vivian Gornick. And she too used to be at Penn State. She would catch a bus, come teach her course, spend the night there, and then come back to the city. And having read the situation and the story in your class, I have always offered it to my own students. And I had read it by the time I saw Vivian Gornick, and she said to me something, and I said, you know, I had accosted her in the mailroom, MAIL, and I said to her, I'm such an admirer of yours. I want to be a real writer, blah, 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 blah. And she said, you want to be a writer? What are you doing here? You know, you'll never produce good writing in the suburbs. You have to be in the city, you know. And I didn't follow that advice, but it was a good advice. I really, and one of the things I would do, Billy Joe will remember, there was a secondhand bookstore, a bookstore right next to our university, and there was a secondhand section. I'd just buy these cheap books, Liz, and I would buy tea. They used to sell tea. I would buy Lapsang Souchong, and I started. That was the time when I started keeping these little notebooks, and I would try to write anything that came to my mind. I'm trying to say in my stupid roundabout way that it takes a lot of effort to break free from what you described as the shackles of, you know, academic requirement. And really, to be honest, one is never free, you know? One is never free.
Well,
it's an effort all the time, but
we are very lucky here at the School of the Arts. We are not part of the English department, so those measures and demands are zero facing any of us here.
Yeah, okay.
It makes a huge difference. I mean,
I bet it does, yes.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Another thing you've written a great deal about in very fresh ways is the immigrant experience. You came to this country, I think, in '86, is that right?
That's right, that's right.
And you have such interesting things to say about that. When did you first start writing about that part of your life?
Yeah, that was one of my earliest entries into writing, really. I don't want to say it was petty, but it was certainly writing with a vengeance, or vengeful writing. You know what I'm saying? It was writing which sought to take revenge for all the insults that had been heaped on me when I had gone to get my visa, or when I would meet the customs officer. It was such a familiar routine that by '87, I started doing little bits of writing and painting and writing little poems, which if folks are interested, they could Google. It's called Love Poems for the Border Patrol, I think. An excerpt was published at the New Yorker. So that is when it started. I mean, it gave me a sense of identity, that sense of hurt. And that sense of identity then led to a voice that at that time was at least filled with some anger. But that stuck with me. And I tried to, you know, so my first book was really, if you open your passport, it says name, place of birth, date of birth, etc. And it's just one word or two words. And I thought, that's what the customs officer or the state demands of me. How to tell a more elaborate story, or a story that is my own, or that is filled with contradictions and sometimes lies. And what about language? My passport never asked me about language, but as a writer, that is how I announce myself or recognize myself. So how about keeping a chapter on, you know, language? So What I'm saying to you is that that immigrant experience right in the very beginning was a spur to achieving a voice, and which I think is a very important part for any writer. You know, the voice, who you're speaking as.
You write a great deal, not just about the voice, which a lot of people write about, but finding the register for your voice, which is a much more complicated issue. And you write very beautifully about that. In your book about where you grew up, Patna, you write about all kinds of people you encountered and the way of life and the culture of the place. But I was very surprised to finish it and to have your family not be part of that book, because that's who you were with in Patna. I know they popped up in your novel. There they are with other names, but I know enough about what you referred to understand that that's where they moved. But did you make a conscious decision? Of course you did. I mean, why did you leave them out of that book, which is all about growing up?
Yeah. I mean, they do come in just at the beginning and then at the end. Right. They come up at the beginning because my sister always tells these stories, and there I am. It was a similar kind of notebook. It was number 18 at that time, that day, or number 28, I can't remember. I had come back to my home and I was writing down the notes I had taken from a performance. And my sister, my elder sister, who's a doctor in that town, was telling my younger sister about her relative who was having an affair with a receptionist in his hospital. And I put that in the book in the very beginning. And then when it was published, an Indian newspaper excerpted that part, and my sister called me and she said, "Are you crazy?" Now, I don't want to use this dramatic example to say to you, to claim that, no, but I did write. What I'm saying is that I did go in with a conscious decision that I would not hold anything back. I must also tell you, Liz, that I'm from the poorest state. Sanjeev here will attest to this. And when we went to Delhi to study, for example, people would make fun of us as people from that state. And I was also very conscious of that. And I had decided when I went that I'd write about all our deficiencies without trying to have that sort of a protective defensiveness that I had always had when interacting with people in Delhi. And the real place where the family came in was when I had to contemplate at the very end when I will come up. If you don't mind, could I just read 2 paragraphs?
Of course, I would love it. Always.
To return to Patna is to find the challenging thought of death, like the tip of a knife, pressing against my ribs. In a clip from a BBC documentary available on YouTube, the British historian and traveler Michael Wood steps off a boat on the banks of the Ganges in Patna. In 300 BCE, when the Greeks sent their ambassador Megasthenes to India, he called what is present-day Patna the greatest city in the world. All along the banks of the river, a stretch of 9 or 10 miles, there were palaces and pleasure gardens. At the time Megasthenes was visiting, Patna was a new imperial city. The sunlight falling on his face, Wood gushes about modern Patna. He speaks of the tangled roots of history, all still alive today. He declares that to walk through Patna is like making one's way through the Indian version of ancient Rome. I felt pride when I heard that, but I have to admit that my view of history is not so grand. In fact, it is rather narrow and is measured in days, at most months and seldom years. There is no way to avoid it. When I step on Patna's soil, I only want to see how much older my parents look. Rheumatoid arthritis has seized my mother's limbs, and she finds it impossible even to comb her hair. My father's memory is as sharp as it has always been, certainly better than mine. But the contours of his body have begun to sag. He goes for a walk each morning, but I noticed last time that he was limping. I arrive in Patna, and a few days later, I leave. Each time I leave, I wonder about the circumstances under which I will need to return. So it is there as a haunting. But Liz, you should have really been more generous with me and said to me every time, send me anything you write and I will tell you how you can be a little bit better. And then I would have actually done that. I would have introduced my family in a much better way. But you were busy with these, coddled Columbia students.
I have nothing to teach you anymore, my dear. You're a wonderful writer.
You are sweet.
Another subject that you take up, which you are related to in a very personal way, you come from India and your wife from Pakistan, which is a subject entirely on its own. In fact, you have a book called Husband of a Fanatic, which is a great title. But your view of that world of hatred and animosity and rancor that goes on forever, which I'm very aware of myself, having written about Palestinians and Israelis, is so nuanced and so rich. One of the sections that I really so admired is when you're talking about a time after the riots in Gujarat, and a boy has seen small boy has seen the worst atrocities possible with his family, and he's asked a question. Do you remember that section?
Yeah. It was a girl.
Can you talk about it a little?
Yeah. The Prime Minister of India at the moment was the Chief Minister then, and he was responsible, in my opinion, for a pogrom, the killing of 1,000 or more Muslim men and women and children, and a lot of rapes. And that scene that you're talking about is when a child says, these human rights activists had gone in, and one of them mentioned rape, and the child said, yeah, I know what is rape. She described how when people come and take the girl and throw her on the fire. Because we are talking also about strategies of nonfiction, I must tell you, there was one woman who had been killed because she had been married to someone from the other religion. So the night I arrived, I went to a party. It was a dinner held by a civil rights lawyer, human rights lawyer. And I started asking, do you know of couples who are, those, folks belonging to the two religions, Hindu and Muslim? And one man said, yeah, here's a number, but don't tell them that I gave you the number. And I talk about how when I called, the wife was the one who picked up, and she said, no, the husband is at work. And then I called the man at work, and I said, hello, I wanted, blah, blah, blah. And he said, who gave you my number? And I said, I don't know. I've just arrived, la, la, la. And he said, I said, it was a friend of yours, I think, but I don't remember the name. And he said, well, if you see him again, you tell him that if he's really a friend of mine, he will not be giving my number to anyone. These are very difficult times. And then he did not talk to me. And then when I was leaving after a few days, and I had all these conversations, including women who had been raped and who spoke something, from a community where strangers would not at all be readily spoken to, I thought the bravery or the courage of someone saying that this happened, then this happened, or a woman picking up her sari to show me her bruises and stuff. That was very moving, and it also was something that taught me about the responsibility of really respecting what people were trying to say. And to return to the original story, I called this man again and I said, hello, and he recognized my voice right away. And I said, I was calling from a public call booth, and he recognized my voice, and I said, I just wanted to apologize. I seem to have disturbed you. But what I was trying to say is that if it needed, I wanted always to be honest on the page. And if I needed to tell a lie, that, oh, I do not know who your friend was, then I would. But that I would reveal this on the page. So I'm just sharing that with you and opening myself to your criticism also, Liz, because I want to say, I don't know, it has sometimes got me into stupid situations where I have not been able to, I have lied to get into a situation where I'm talking to a murderer. But then I cannot get out of that act and say, actually, you know what? I lied to those people. I actually came here to hear your story. And I just wanted to ask you, how the hell do you go to sleep at night? You know, something like that. I've not been able to do that because you are caught in a fiction, you know?
You have been able to do that because you do it in your book about terrorists.
Yeah.
It looks at the state in the same for the culpability of the state in the picture we have of terrorism and terrorists in such a complicated and interesting way. But to go back to what you were just talking about, all those examples were incredibly strong in the book, but I'm actually referring to yet another one.
Oh, okay.
Where the little boy is being interviewed. And what you are focusing on is the extremely unusual subject of the boys being repeatedly asked these questions after he's seen the worst atrocities. And he's been numbed by the media and he knows what he's supposed to do.
Yes.
Kid is just repeating this stuff with this expressionless
scene,
and it's completely terrifying.
Yes. Now I remember that. Sorry. Yes. I thought there was a warning there also for writers, I thought.
Exactly.
Yes. How does something get polished into a narrative that is, I don't know, sleek or is conventional, really conventional? That's really, and how to retain the rough edges of reality is really what it is about, you know? Or I mean, I'm eager to hear what you think. What do you think, Liz?
Well, I think you handled that I think the subject there is the coarseness of the convention. Or get the kid to tell you the story, the kid's story. Oh, he was a witness, get the kid. There's no humanity in the exchange. And the kid has gotten so used to it that he apart from watching his whole family get slaughtered, now he's obliged to give a kind of friendly version of it to somebody who's intruding on this catastrophe in the most awful. I thought you handled it magnificently because I don't think that's written about very much, although we're aware of it in the current world. I mean, thank God for the media in this era.
Yeah.
Kiss their feet. I mean, they've made life possible. But you know, it's a complicated subject. You know, very, very complicated subject.
Yeah. Can I ask you something, Liz? I don't mean to interrupt but you know, you will always be a teacher and I'll always be a student in that form. So I must ask you, there's a little passage which some of my own friends do not agree with me and dislike me for repeating, but I want to get I don't want your approval. I just want your view. This is in the Patna book. I recently read in an interview with the Irish writer, this is on page 37 in the Patna book. I read an interview with the Irish writer Colm Tóibín. Tóibín had told a class he was teaching that you have to be a terrible monster to write. Everything is material, the writer was saying, even confidences that someone has indiscreetly shared with you. Tóibín's advice to writers was to go ahead and use the story, even if writers were going to identify the person you were writing about. The writer's credo must be, use it, because it will make a great story. Tóibín has said, if you can't do it, then writing isn't for you. You have no right to be here. If there's any way I can help you get into law school, then I will. Your morality will be more useful in a courtroom. What do you think?
I talk about this with my students all the time, actually. On the one hand, I urge them to be brave and go much further than they're willing to do, and that they should try to shed their feelings of betrayal as much as they humanly can. I mean, this is the school of Janet Malcolm, and that everybody who doesn't understand that this is the way things are is a fool or stupid. I think it's bullshit. I don't agree with it at all.
Yes.
I think there are limits, and I think human lives are more important than any sentence on the page.
Wow.
And I think if you're going to I think though you have to calibrate it very finally, I think you can go much further than my students think they can go, much, much, much further.
Exactly.
But I think there are limits.
Yes.
And if you're going to make somebody, you know, who you love incredibly distressed, or even somebody whose reputation is going to be damaged or something like, you have to weigh those things as, I mean, there's a lot of life in writing, but it's not separated from life. It's just a reflection of it and a kind of imaginative turn on it. So
Yes.
I hate that view.
Yes.
And it's also
Yes.
sort of romantic, if I may say so.
Yes.
There's
Yes.
a kind of romanticism about it that makes me want to throw something.
Wow. Well, I appreciate your saying that and saying that so clearly.
Put me down as undecided. Come on, Amitava.
Well, what? Say that again. I didn't hear you.
I was kidding. I said put me down as undecided.
No. I want to share with our audience Lis's book.
This is
And you
not,
know, where you're talking to an Israeli family and you're talking to a Palestinian family, it is precisely the patience and the care on such a complicated issue that comes across, where you are not performing any betrayals. I must tell you that in my case, I did feel that the short book on Patna, I thought I was going to betray people, and I did, you know. It was an attitude I adopted to do that work, especially with a poet whose marriage I was writing about. I thought, no, man, it can't stay within. It can't stay within. You know, it doesn't need to be within inside a curtain silence, a curtain of silence. I should draw it out. I don't know. So, but I know and I respect.
those are two views. They are two views. On the other hand, you did mask some people's names, right?
That's right.
So
even his name, I did mask, but Hindi newspapers wrote little pieces about him after my piece came out. So whatever. And many people disliked me for it, and I got some abuse, and I was totally okay with that. Of course, I deserved it.
That can't be helped to some extent.
Yeah.
One of the things you actually write most movingly about is language, and you write about literature as your home. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I must tell folks that one of the things you introduced me to is chapter 5 of Nabokov's Speak Memory. And my God.
The one that I cannot read to my students without crying. It's so embarrassing.
It's an amazing chapter.
Embarrassing.
What a gift. Listen, Liz. I'm sorry that I'm shaking this table on which I'm speaking, but you know, as teachers, I think the best thing we can do is introduce our students to good writing. And you gave me a gift by introducing me to that book. I've never let it go. In fact, talking about language, talking about voice, when all the things he does is just so incredible that, of course, the first thing you want to do is give up writing. But if you're going to have a little bit of courage and come back to the task of writing,
Yes.
it's an incredible guide to have, to just keep. So,
The book he's talking about is Speak Memory.
yes. Chapter 5, you had Xeroxed it for us, and I've got that copy, and I have now read it so many times, this chapter.
It's magnificent. And it's sort of funny because he says at the beginning of that chapter how he gave qualities in various people to various characters. He just distributed them, and he was writing this to have the people whole and in their reality. But of course, he's not doing that at all. He's creating a nonfiction version of the same imaginative fictional person, and you just know that. But it's so brilliant. It's for me too. I've never tired of that.
Yeah.
It's chapter 5. Mademoiselle, it's called that chapter.
Yes. Regarding language, you know, I teach my students, you know, even in first year student writing, I introduce them to someone who I think of as writing rather transparently, but with a sense of self-implication of the self, like George Orwell. And then I get into, later in the course, people like Nabokov or even David Foster Wallace and others, because my students like them. I'm very alert to, or want to be alert to, the ways in which my language always fails, and the moments where it becomes meretricious, you know, and if I can sort of comment on what is it that I'm losing, and then what is it that I'm gaining and then losing again, then I'm involving my reader in a process. And so for me, language, but also a language of doubt or betrayal is important because then it becomes more real or more honest. Does that make sense to you?
Of course it does. Of course it does. What do you consider the hardest project that you ever took on?
I have to tell you, Liz, I was just thinking, I'm not very smart, but I was thinking, Liz will ask me this question, like she'll say, and I must tell her, I must confide in her, even though so publicly, that nonfiction came rather easily to me. Maybe because you taught me only nonfiction. You know what I'm saying? And then when I started doing, no, really, listen to me. And then when I started doing the fiction, this book, I really wanted to actually have a little non-fictional tone to it. So I worked very hard, for example, to even have my character, who has got a name like Kailash, which is a Bihari name in my opinion, in my head. It changes into, someone calls him Kalashnikov, and then from Kalashnikov it becomes AK-47, and AK-47 becomes AK, and which is, my initials. And I thought I was being very clever, but you know why? Because I really wanted the reader to sort of believe that I'm telling my own story.
Right.
And indeed, I'm not. So what was most difficult for me was this project, because I wanted it to be both have the feel of nonfiction, the texture of my lived life, and yet be enormously inventive, making up things all the time on every page. Which, when I'm writing nonfiction, I'm trying to be as honest as I possibly can. And here, to keep some of that, but then to be wildly imaginative. I don't think I succeeded in being wildly imaginative, but that's what was the difficult part.
It's a wonderful book, and I think you succeeded very well in. It's clearly a work of fiction, but I mean, I kept trying to match up things to your life.
I know.
I didn't know what those things were, but I felt I was having a matchup there. First of all, it satisfied me about your family, which I had been longing to know more about. I know, I can tell you loved your mother very much, and today was her birthday, right?
Yeah. Oh my God! How did you know that? How did you remember that?
Because you told me.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. Good. I thought, oh my God. But I told you a long time ago. It was very sweet of you to remember. Yes.
It's a wonderful book. And, a lot of people who write nonfiction don't write fiction very well, and vice versa. Updike did, and there are various people who did, but most don't. And I think it's a triumph, really, and beautiful to read.
You're very sweet, very kind. But listen, Liz, before you go on, please give me a couple more names. Who can one read who do both those things well?
Fiction, probably Philip Lopez, who's somewhere in the audience, can tell you more than I can. I can't off the top of my head.
Oh my God, I've got Philip Lopez right here. There are several.
He's writing somewhere there.
That's amazing.
Philip, are you there somewhere?
Oh, he is. Oh my God. Philip, I must tell you, I also teach in my classes your essay on the essay form and the volume on writing about New York that you edited, various things. So thank you. It's wonderful to be here in the same audience, in the same group.
Maybe you can send it in chat. Anyway, we have to stop now because I know there are questions that people will have for you, and I want to make sure they have time to do that. So if it's okay with you, we will proceed to the Q&A.
Yes, of course. I'm sorry that I gave you rather long answers.
You didn't. You gave great answers. Eyal, you want to help us out with that?
Yeah, sure. A couple people sent questions in ahead of time, so I'll let Akash ask first. You can unmute yourself and just ask a question.
Okay, thank you so much. My question is tied to the separation of fiction and nonfiction. And you referred to Vivian Gornick, her situation in the story, and I'm curious to kind of tie my question to that, her advice to create oneself as a character.
That's right.
And I'm curious how you see that as different in fiction versus nonfiction, in creating yourself versus creating other characters. How does the task differ, and what do you bring to that task?
Yeah.
Excellent question.
Yeah. Well, in nonfiction, yourself doesn't change. I mean, if you're thinking about an essay, I mean, Philip, for example, writes about how the essay should show your own struggle with something. An essay is an attempt. So yourself doesn't change, though your thinking can. In fiction, one shouldn't have the assumption, Akash, you're assuming that you're always writing only as yourself. What if you're writing in, I mean, your character is a different situation of someone with a different age, someone of a different gender, someone from a different country. Of course, in this one, I was trying very hard because of my familiarity with nonfiction. I was trying very hard to speak in a voice that I could think of as my own or close to my own. You understand? But right now, I'm thinking of a man who is 88 years old in India, in Bihar. So I'm trying to write in a different voice.
Is this is fiction you're talking about?
Yeah. So I'm inventing that voice. And yet, you know, there are so many examples. For example, if I think of Marilyn Robinson's Gilead, or if I think about Paul Harding's Tinkers, the vocabulary, or a lovely little book that I admire a lot by Dennis Johnson called Train Dreams. You know, the syntax is so recognizably different because it belongs to another time. So I am trying to say to you that if you are stepping into other characters in fiction, you are both challenged by, but aided by the idea of the language belonging to another time or another place. And that helps you find a different voice. But in nonfiction, you know, I have tried very hard to escape the voice of those, you know, those commentators that you hear at a tennis game. They always speak with a little bit of a hush, and they say things like, no, she is, let's see, I mean, if she double faults a second time, that will be a real challenge to her because otherwise she has been holding the game well. You know, that sort of thing. You know, that hush, because you're intimidated by the project or something. And I try to just kind of overcome it by reading Nabokov, for example, or drinking a lot of coffee, and then thinking, come on, man, give your syntax a little bit of a swag.
Record speaks for itself. They filed cases all across this country.
Another question, Eyal?
Single piece of litigation.
Yeah, this is from Georgette, asking about implementing various styles in one piece, let's say the personal and the academic. How do you integrate both of them into one piece?
I was distracted by the little bit of news that was coming in from someone, so I did not hear you, Eyal. I'm so sorry.
The question was about implementing various writing styles in one piece, let's say the personal and the academic. How do you integrate both of them?
Yeah. You know, I was praising Maggie Nelson, but I have to say, and please don't tell her this because I really do like her a lot. I think her pure nonfiction books about her aunt are, for me, much more appealing. Jane or Red Parts.
Me too.
Than Argonauts, you know, because
Me too.
the Argonauts represents the effort to integrate those discourses. And I think, in other words, I'm trying to answer the question by saying, I don't know. Why do you want to integrate? Be free, you know? But how do I do that? The examples that I offer in Everyday I Write the Book are people like Maggie, Claudia Rankine, Jeff Dyer, people who are widely read, but where they're learning. I mean, you know, Claudia Rankine has read a lot of race theory, but those short pieces in Citizen do not necessarily announce her reading, and they plumb great feeling. So I like that. In other words, I'm trying to argue that please don't try to integrate much, you know, wear it very lightly. Let it be latent, maybe.
Good answer.
Thank you.
Are there more questions?
Yeah, there are a couple more. Shane was next and then Shelby after that.
Shane's questions are always very difficult to answer, but go ahead. They're masterpieces of complexity.
Hi, Professor Kumar. Thanks for flattering me. So I'm broadcasting you from the cinema, actually. So my mind is on other forms. We were talking about nonfiction, but of course, nonfiction exists outside of literature too, right? And I know you as not only a writer, but as a visual artist, someone who's worked in documentary film. So I had to ask if you could tell us about other works of nonfiction that have influenced you or that speak to you or that you're a conversation with other modes and other disciplines.
Sure, sure. Did you guys happen to read my friend Teju Cole's piece on Caravaggio a few weeks ago?
Brilliant.
I thought that, yeah, thanks, Liz. So Shane, I don't know, did you read that, bro?
I haven't yet. I'd love to. I saw it.
You know, the idea of writing about dark corners and sensuality and hurt and violence, and that the syntax itself portraying it, which comes to Teju from John Berger, I think that is just marvelous. I wish, in fact, just this week, on tomorrow, first 129 pages of Teju Cole's Open City is up for discussion in my class. And on page 36, his narrator enters a museum and sees the paintings where the figures appear silent. And he discovers that they are all deaf and mute children. And the artist, whose name is John Brewster, was himself deaf. The way in which he is writing about those pictures has such an enormous stillness about it that I was thinking that tomorrow I'll say to the students, okay, how do you do writing where all your senses are alive and you're able to do a portrait of the painting in a way that is just like the artist has done on canvas. So that's one example I'm thinking. What are you thinking of? Are you thinking?
I mean, photographers, filmmakers, anybody else who is particularly in nonfiction, since that's what this illustrious series is about, and other ways of sort of expressing reality or representing reality.
Okay. Let me ask you then. I know you must be very aware of Arthur Jaffa's work, right? And must say, I have over and over watched the video, Love is the Message.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking, what an incredible montage or collage it is, but how did he bring these things together? How does one learn? How does one find a logic of bringing things of yoking things together that produces this incredible charge? I don't know. I mean, there is an interview of Michael Ondaatje's where he says, and I'll send this to Liz so that she can share it with her students, where he says if he could steal a painting from or a work of art, he would steal this collage. And it's a collage made by, I think, a German Marxist just before the Second World War. And whenever I look at it, I think, okay, what is the difference between this collage and anything I can do? Why does this one have structure and energy?
Yeah.
That part, man, I don't know.
It's magic. I hope you will teach with me next year. I'm teaching a class about this called creative development, and we're talking about the essay film.
Yes. And let's get Liz to come and Philip Lopet to come, and we'll have a great thing. And Eyal, you also come, bro. All right, and then we'll have some good times.
Before I let you go, I'll show you yourself as Big Brother real quick, because you are on the big screen. This is how I see you right now.
Go back to it for a second. We went too fast.
Okay.
Go back to it for a second.
Go back to the screen?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Speaking of nonfiction.
Great.
There you are, Liz, right, midnight. There you are.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Shane.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Here's something you don't know, Amitava. We both began as painters. And
wow.
Left that behind because language was where our playing field really was.
Wow. That's wonderful.
Yes, Eyal, more?
Yeah, we have quite a few more. I'm not sure how much time we have, but Shelby was next.
How much time do we have, Nora? How much time do we have?
Does this go to 8:30?
I don't know. Are we cut off at 8:30, or can we just go on a little bit more?
No, yeah, the meeting won't end at 8:30. We can take extra time if you'd like.
Okay, if they're just a handful, we can do that, right? Okay.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
those who have to go can
Yeah.
go.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, so Shelby was next.
Yes. Hi, Professor Kumar. It's good to see you. I am Vassar class of 2010.
Oh
And
my God.
I took your creative writing class back in 2007.
Oh my God.
And then I went to Columbia University and MFA in fiction. I just graduated last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and it's great. When I saw that you were coming, I was so excited to see you again. It's been a very long time.
Oh my God.
But I learned a lot from your class, obviously, and have continued to carry it with me. And one of the things that I remember you saying distinctly, I could see it in the classroom, and this is really a testament to, you know, being a teacher and how it is carried through with your students through many years. But you were talking about the strategies of nonfiction and kind of what you and Liz were talking about earlier, where you have to, as a nonfiction writer, go out and seek stories sometimes. I think a lot of times in the current moment, we have a lot of memoir, we had a lot of people writing about maybe their own life, their own memories, kind of sitting in one place and diving into their own consciousness to find stories. But I remember something that stuck out to me is you really advocate for seeking out stories.
Yes.
Outside of your own experience to find them. And I'm just wondering, in the intervening years, if you have gotten any more insight into that advice, and has it changed at all? What is your current advice for new young nonfiction writers? Do you say the same thing about going out to seek stories, or has that changed with like the political climate or the social climate? How is that conversation happening in your classes today?
Wow. First of all, Shelby, it's great to see you. Now, when you were a student here, did you have the same last name?
Yes.
Okay,
So,
cool. Only your face looks familiar, but your name somehow what? Okay, good. I'll check it out. I really, the reason why about 10, 12 years ago, I started even teaching a course in journalism here was because I thought I should really provoke my students, nudge them to go out into the world, you know, that the world with its radical surprises would be so much more interesting thing to write about than certainly in my case, my shallow self, you know. And sometimes my students hate me. I think I saw Rachel's name there. I think it was the same year or maybe a year later. There was a student who really did not want to go and write about the aftermath of, you know, there was a serial killer here. I don't know whether you remember this. It would have been about 10, 15 years ago, but he had killed 13, 14 women. And I said to him, no, go man, go to the court, look at the papers, see what even the cops or the judges you've gone to talk to. If you can't find someone in the family, you have to talk to them. And this is a little pushy of me, and he hated me for it. In fact, his father also at graduation said something of that kind to me. But this guy produced some incredible writing as a result of that. For example, is the right word, you know, that when that exercise that you do, Zumba or something, what is it called? Zumba. He enrolled in a class, and when he was helping the instructor carry back the loudspeaker, the amplifier to his car, the teacher said, thank you. And then this kid said, you know, it's okay, but I should confess to you that I came to your class only because I wanted to ask you about your brother. His brother was the serial killer. And I thought everything he wrote about this encounter was so rich. His reticence, his opposition to his professor, his discovery of this person, the awkwardness, and then talking to the victim's mother, one of the victims' mother, and the mother saying, what do you want from me? You know, I thought it gave a sense of life. I'm always struck also by the imaginative ways in which some of the students respond. I mean, one student had a simple device. You will remember, Shelby, at the Poughkeepsie station, the line of immigrant men who say, Vassar, you know, the taxi drivers. And so he would he would say to the driver, take me, I'll pay you to take me wherever, a place that is of importance to you. And please take me there and tell me your story. Why is it important? That's all I want. And he succeeded in collecting some great stories. So I'm always amazed by how these encounters with the real or coming up with some things produce a sense of our world. So I'm even more fanatical about that now. Thanks for the question and great to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah.
Alex, next.
Hi, Amitava.
Hi.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I know you.
So, yeah, I guess through
From Instagram.
Yeah. Can you talk about leading every day? I write the book with the Cy Twombly painting, and maybe how to write about art personally, but still with like a sense of authority. That might not be the right word, but you know, when you write art history, it's kind of like the personal is always frowned upon.
Yeah. You know, I'll address the second one first. Lis mentioned Janet Malcolm, and you know her, what is it called? Her essay is called something like 41 False Moves or something about David Sally.
That's right, David Sally. It's a wonderful, I can't stand David Sally, but it's a wonderful essay.
Yes.
A profile, really.
Yes. But it is made up of these, I think, Lis, correct me if I'm wrong, but she actually calls it something like 41 false moves or something.
Yeah, she does.
Yes. And so I love that undercutting of authority and at the same time a reaching for authority.
Well, yeah, I tell my students not to try this at home, however.
That's right.
But it's brilliant. It is
a
wonderful essay.
I mean, so that, but for me, and since I spoke about my friend Teju Cole, I mean, I have to say the entry into John Berger and the idea that he introduced me to as a young man in ways of seeing, when he reads the words of a critic describing Franz Hals' paintings, and he describes how that important critic writes about the glowing blacks and this and that and the pattern and the rain. And he says, no, this painting is by one of the preeminent artists of Netherlands who had become a beggar by the end of his life. And this painting that he did was done in exchange for a load of peat to warm his hands. And what you see in this painting is the struggle of an artist to remain objective while painting his oppressors. To say anything else is mystification. For me, it's like, well, all right, you know? So that's the authority I sometimes want to seek. What is it? To say what would be mystification, and to say what something else would be coming closer to the truth, a more difficult truth or a hurtful truth or a repressed truth. That's something that excites me a lot. Why Cy Twombly? You know, I thought, what does one aspire to in writing? A certain effortlessness, a certain ease, and also a certain style. And how does this guy, in painting after painting, seem to be representing writing? It's all writing, you know, and it's so infinitely varied and always engaging and so beautiful. And this, I led with that because I thought in that book, because I thought the simplicity of that motion is something that I would like us to have, you know. Everyone, especially in academia, is so tortured about writing. What would it be if we made it easier? You know, something.
Thank you. Thank you.
Incredible. Thank you.
We have 3 more questions, if that's okay.
Is that okay, Amitava?
Oh, it's absolutely okay with me. And of course, thank you anyone who is leaving. Thanks for being here so far.
This one is from Sanjeev. He says, thank you for this amazing talk. I'm curious if you feel at times an intense desire to go silent or feel trapped by the world created by your own words. In other words, what is the role of silence in your writing?
Okay. I must say, I do not meditate on silence. I meditate, but I do not meditate on silence. I am struck by silence. I mean, the only thing I want to say there is, when the pandemic started, I really had a genuine fear of academics beginning to write about it and explain it too quickly. I wanted silence. And I was especially distressed that Slavoj Žižek was expectedly the first person 10 days into the pandemic to have a book out with a pun on pandemic, etc. I thought this is why academics should be banned from writing for a while, you know? That's the appeal. That's where the appeal of silence comes. But let me give it a more serious thing just for half a minute. I don't know about Lis, whether you read the stories in the Decameron Project that Rivka Galchin edited in the New York Times Magazine. I thought Rivka's introduction, she's so smart, was so good, you know, but that was nonfiction. The fiction that followed, to me, except for one or two stories, I remember Rachel Kushner's, for example, was great. Except for one or two stories, a few of them, most of them were dissatisfying to me. And that was about silence, really. It's about silence in the sense that experience, you know, experiences, when you get your hand burnt, you pull back your hand quickly. You can't help it. But you don't need to quickly write, as quickly write about it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Let your hand heal.
Thank you. Yes, Eyal.
Jay?
Hi, Amitav.
Hello,
my
hello.
son is here, so I'm not switching on my camera.
No problem, no problem.
Yeah, I just wanted to know about Immigrant Montana's, the characters of Peter and Maya, and the whole depression and the way he commits suicide. And the way you characterized Maya was like, I can feel it, someone coming from Bihar and coming to Delhi and feeling like, you know, irritated by these characters. But at the end of the novel, you don't feel agitated towards Maya. Like you feel that kind of, you know, calmness and like there's no negativity to. So how to do that? How did you manage to do that? And otherwise, like the kind of research gone into the novel, it feels like it's a novel written for over 20 years.
Yes.
So how you manage that?
Thank you. I did research it for 20 years, boss. So, in fact, I was telling Lis just before we started, and since you have translated the thing, you will remember all the thing about Nina and lipstick was something I wrote for Lis, you know. Just notes, trying to connect things, leave some things out and make connections. That question that you're asking about humanizing someone, I mean, in that case, yes, I thought of someone, you know, my folks were peasants. We come from Bihar, and you don't need to be told, you know, the way people mock us in Delhi. And I thought of Maya as a character who fitted that, you know, people who was from South Delhi, who wore ethnic jewelry, who were sophisticated, cosmopolitan. And I just thought that if I thought of a colleague of mine dating her, or just, you know, how shall I say? You start maybe sometimes with an ideological position, but if you're really writing good fiction, which I hope I am, my God, you have to give that character their own life, and it emerged that way. The sadness of this boy's suicide. And I was also inspired by the character who I had put as the mentor figure. I had never met him, you know, but people always say he was such a human person, Iqbal Ahmed, and such a good teacher that he would always ask people, graduate students would come to his door and he would say, have you eaten? And he would make food for them. So I thought of, well, after the suicide, he goes to see Maya, and I thought how to be caring like him. I had stepped into his character. So I think my narration takes on a humanness because I was inspired by what I thought was the incredible humanity of this man. So that's what motivated me, really.
Okay, I think this must be the last question, Eyal, okay?
Yeah. Karishma?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
I'm so excited I get to be on the last question. I remember you kind of talking a little bit about voice and kind of register of voice with Liz. And I was just wondering if you could maybe speak to that a little bit more about kind of how you go about settling into a voice when you write in any genre, and the role you kind of, or space you kind of see it taking up in writing.
Karishma, where do I know you from? I've heard you ask a question either of me or of some other writer in New York.
I graduated from the MFA program in 2018, so I was
cool.
around.
Okay. Yes. Maybe Philip had organized a nonfiction 2 days of Hilton Als was there, and maybe I saw you there, but there was a question. So no problem. Yeah. In some ways, I addressed that question a little while ago when I spoke about trying to resist the slightly hushed, people like us and, Jay, for example, or Sanjeev, English really came to us as the language in which you probably grew up in England, perhaps, Karishma? Is that
yes,
right?
Yeah.
But for us, growing up in provincial India, English was really the language of the homework. You had to do your homework, and we did not speak to our parents or our friends in that language. I certainly never did. So I feel that for us, either we very quickly adopt a bureaucratic language in India, I mean, or we have this little intimidated, hushed voice. And so that's the part of me that always thinks, how do you actually acquire an attitude and convey that, So in other words, for me, it's mostly a battle against my own history. But in more recent years, the professional sort of thing has been how to sacrifice, how to do away with all the sort of defensive subordinate clauses that are supposed to represent thoughtfulness in academia, how to get rid of that clutter, how to arrive at a sentiment in a more unchecked way. So that's one part of the professional drive. The other part of the professional drive for me is that I've always been interested in journalism. And for me that, Liz has introduced me, for example, to Ian Frazier. I remember her teaching a piece of his in our class. And I am interested in, quote unquote, the new journalists. There's a lovely book by Robert Boynton, which has interviews with these people. I like people who have a voice in journalism rather than who have a certain warmth and a presence on the page, rather than not as a way of self-representing and presentation of a self, but rather a warm, alert, observant presence. That's what I like. And in my fiction and in my nonfiction, there's a lovely phrase that James Wood has, who, by the way, was also at that Philip Lopate thingy. James Wood has this great phrase called, the noticer. I want to be a great noticer, how to notice things. That's what Chekhov had.
So you are. Thank you, Amitava. What a lovely evening. Thank you so much for your generosity and for.
Liz, let's get together soon.
We will do that.
You are so sweet, so generous. I love you.
I love you too. Okay, everybody. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, friends.
And goodbye. And I'll call you soon, Amitava.
Sure. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.